Welcome to the Boston Men's Group podcast. We're a group of dedicated coaches. If you're interested in personal growth, professional achievement, then take down your guard and tune in. All right. 10, 9, 8. No, I'm kidding.
I'm like, really? 10? I'm like, okay, let's go.
Hey, I've got Paul Dio here with us today with Boston Men's Group's podcast. And today we're going to talk about growth mindset and most likely the number one thing that you need to be looking at if you want to grow as a human being. So Paul Dio is one of those people that a lot of people come up to me and say, you're working with Paul Dio. I've listened to everything he says. I love the stuff that he asks. He's notorious for asking really thoughtful questions. And I just feel so lucky to have you as part of the Boston Men's Group and as really sort of a teacher. Even just the conversation we had before we got on this about the question you asked your wife. You're a really thoughtful human being. So tell us a little bit about you and what sort of drives you in life.
Yeah, it's interesting. So my parents are originally from the Philippines, and they instilled me a knowledge of being able to self-reflect. And I was growing up, I was very introverted type of kid, but I just figured out, I was different. I thought differently from other people, but then I realized, you know what, I just pay attention to details in different ways. And so part of that is, I grew up in a predominantly white type of school system, and I was the only Asian person. And so it allowed me to compare and contrast the way I thought. And in addition, I'm a lefty. So by being a lefty, by being a lefty, you kind of see the world in a different view, and the world tells you that lefties are this and that. And I wanted to be a catcher growing up, and I couldn't be a catcher because I was a lefty. I couldn't do all these things because I was a lefty. So I've always had that different type of mindset, but more so everything I do is geared towards becoming more self-aware. So if I'm taking on a job or if I'm talking to you, it's just, how do I come to grips with the voice that's inside my head, and how do I get better at it? And it could be, from playing a sport. It could be from interviewing another person. It could be from leading someone with their finances. But it's that self-reflection that really makes me tick. Money is important. Don't get me wrong. It's not. It is important. But for me, it's. I was thinking about this morning. There's the people that like to throw the stone in the river and like to see the ripples. And there's other people that like to throw the stone in the river and then take credit for all the ripples. And then there's the people that just really enjoy skipping rocks. And they don't care what happens, and they just enjoy that whole process of having fun. I'm that person. So I could see and I can influence other people in a positive direction. And that is far more important to me than a scoreboard of domination, a scoreboard of success, accolades, and everything else. It's more so my internal knowing that I help to that person, and not everybody else needs to know that. And it's hard because last week, Megan and I went to LinkedIn Local Boston, and we sat up there and we watched very, very amazing speakers, two of which I have supported for the last year and a half, which is Quentin alums and Mark Metry. And so I went to the event not necessarily to learn the tactics, but it was more so to support them and how far they've gone. And so afterwards, I grabbed a coffee with Quentin the next day, and Quentin was saying, you know what, I like being in the front. I like be able to be recognized. I like being able to walk in Boston and people get to recognize the hat, and I like hearing the stories that I've affected other people. But at the same time, sometimes I like being in the back. Sometimes I like just being responsible, knowing that somebody else is successful because of something that I created, or I made an introduction, or whatever it is. And so I asked him, I said, you know what, do you ever see yourself just going on sabbatical or just disappearing and just like not being in the forefront for a year? And he's like, yeah, I think about it all the time. But this this phase in my life, you know, I'm just figuring it out on my own. And so for me, my biggest influence is the people that impact me the most are the ones that are, you know, they're responsible for the success, but they don't necessarily take all the credit. And it's not for everybody, but that's just my spiel is internally knowing that this interaction, this podcast, or this type of deal didn't go through unless that introduction was made, and that's what makes me tick. So hope that
Cool.
answered the question.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a testament to what you're doing with the men's group as well, I
Yeah.
would say. And I think there's a good segue there into, you know, sort of decidingly saying what your mindset is going to be, which is the topic of this podcast. So I was thinking about it, and just thinking about Charles Duhigg talks about the locus of control. Or is it the center of control? The locus of control, right?
Yeah, something
And
similar. I
I
think it's
think
the locus of control.
it's mentioned in a few other books. I know I've read it a few times, but basically it's saying that you are in control of the decision making. And I see this almost as a layer beneath mindset. Because to me,
Mm-hmm.
this fixed mindset, we should totally break it down for everybody. Like, what does that even mean? Fixed mindset, growth
Yeah.
mindset, and why Boston Men's Group is so into this stuff. Like, this is the jam-oni. It's like mindset's everything. And you hear it all the time, but it's not really, it's almost one of those like, I don't know, just like talky pop. Oh yeah, I have a good mindset. But like, what does that actually mean? Like, we're going to break it down and talk about what it means, how you get it. What is the opposite of having it? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. Like, okay, I'm fixed mindset in every area of my life. I'm growth mindset in another area. Yeah,
Mm.
I think what would be interesting is to understand the origin story of how you found out about fixed mindset and growth mindset, and then I'll also share my like. We recently, our office, we have book club every other month, and we just go around and we share ideas and. This book, Mindset, has probably been recommended to me over 30 times, and it finally came across my desk, and we started reading it. So, yeah, so it's kind of top of mind.
Yes, top of mind. So how I got introduced to it, or when I knowingly, I may have read about it numerous times, but when it really hit me was I was teaching at Fisher College, a class on integrated marketing. And I prepared every class with a little bit of leadership. I started every class with meditation and a leadership piece. So something about being a human being or being great at who you are, and then I would get into the topic of the day, because I couldn't imagine approaching learning any other way. And I see myself as a leadership teacher. So like I was sort of like, I'm teaching the wrong topic, but I must meditate in the beginning. So nonetheless, I started the class with Carol Dweck's. Is that how you say her
Yeah,
last name?
yeah. Well,
Carol
I'm not.
Dweck's
Yeah.
video, her TED talk on mindset, and then had a short discussion, maybe a 15-minute discussion on how we approach the art of learning and how we look at ourselves in relationship to how well we um, so the way, I guess I must define it right now, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. So
Yeah.
to me, so the definition to me anyway, right, is simply that a fixed mindset is that you're giving yourself a scorecard on how well you do in a given area, rather than, so you say, well, I sucked at that, and then that's an indicator of how intelligent you are, rather than saying, well, I've just faced a challenge and I actually have the propensity to learn how to become better at it. So then what ends up happening is you see a trajectory forward of like, well, I could practice, and I could practice intentionally to become better at this thing, versus decidedly saying, well, I'm no good at that because I wasn't good right out of the gate. And you know, I don't think I did a great job of teaching that to the students when I did, because I remember them looking at me. And I was still in this phase where I was like teaching millennials, and that was a huge bridge for me to cross from working with adults to working with young adults, where I don't think in the beginning I had really really understood the way to connect with them. But nonetheless, I became very acutely aware of my mindset, and that I would say I was very much a fixed mindset person
Yeah.
until that point, sadly. Like, I can look at when I was doing video work and some of the more important things. I wrote code for my buddy once. I'm like, all right, I'll do it if you really need me to. And I was like, I can't do this. I'm not capable of this. And I was like, rather than now, I don't say things that like, I can't do that. I don't say that anymore. I say I could do that, and that would be a pain in the ass to learn how to do it.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
have the capability, damn right. Right.
Yeah.
So it's like I've created a new language, and my learning is enhanced because of it. But yeah, I have to look back and go, gosh, I wasted a lot of years thinking I'm not smart enough to do that. Like, you tell yourself that story. And that, to me, I guess, is growth mindset versus fixed. And one more thing that I think is so interesting,
Yeah.
like I'm just like, it's so cool. Is that people, I forget where this one came from, but those who have a fixed mindset actually will under earn and have way less opportunity in life. So they did some study, like a 30-year study, to track students who had a growth mindset, and they ended up happier in better relationships and were paid something astounding like 30% more.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe one of the listeners can plug in that research if you have it, because I'd like to cite it.
Yeah, it's just one of those books where you read multiple books on behavior or habit change or mastery, and mindset always came up. So mindset and flow, the state of flow always came up.
Love
Yeah,
it. Yeah, totally.
the 10,000 hour rules. And so
Yeah.
the way I filter out books to read is, okay, if I'm reading a book and there's an aggregate of stories or aggregate of references, and one book seems to always stick out, then I'll say, okay, maybe it's worth going a little bit deeper into that book. And so I looked up real quick just the general definition of fixed mindset. So
Yeah.
I'm only good at certain things. So what ends up happening, and the thing that I've heard the most with people is, you know what, I'm not good at math.
Right.
I'm not good at this or that, and being able to almost create a confirmation bias around it. Confirmation bias meaning that you've already made a decision and you're looking for evidence to support that decision that you're not good at math, when
Yeah.
actually acknowledging that you could say, I haven't yet put the time and effort into being good at math. I give up when it gets too hard. I hate challenges. I take feedback and criticism personally. I don't like what I don't know. And so when I look at that, when you think about the fixed mindset, you could think about it in a negative way where you're thinking, okay, I'm not good at math or I'm not good at reading, but rarely where people think about it is when it's in a positive light, where, and this really hit home, where, I'm raising a 3.5-year-old daughter and she can draw really well. And so immediately I go to the phrase that says, "Oh, you're such a good artist," or you're really smart at reading, or you're really smart. So in the back of your mind, in back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, why is that bad? Why is it bad for me to recognize that she's smart or that she's good at drawing? Well, they discovered that when individuals were taught that they were smart, they would put themselves in situations where they wouldn't allow the audience or their peers to see them try. So if my daughter was really good at art and she tried to switch over to a new medium, where let's call it pottery or charcoal or whatever it is, and she wasn't good at it, then she wouldn't, if she had the fixed mindset, she wouldn't put herself in a situation to even try, because she's like, oh no, I just want to be known and almost be compliant to the identity that someone else has given me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the growth mindset, this is a little bit different, where it'd be like, Colette, I really um, appreciate the time that you put into practicing your art, and you really did a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that instance, it's rewarding the effort and not the outcome. And I'm going to go a little bit off on a tangent when it comes to the actual decision making versus the result. So I know we're talking about fixing growth mindset, and this has to do with a concept developed by Annie Duke. It's a book about poker players,
Yeah.
and basically what she talks about is too many. There's an instance in poker where if the result is a good outcome, and they attach the decisions behind the good outcome as a good decision, that's what's called resulting. So let me break it down. Let's say the goal of the party to go home from a party was to get home, to drive home safely. So the result would be, if I drove home safely and I didn't get hurt, I didn't get into an accident, then I made good decisions. Well, if you peel back the layers and the result was you drove home safely, but you were drunk, then that's a bad decision. So in essence, resulting would be, if you were resulting, which is called resulting, that would mean that every time you drive drunk and make it home, that means that that's a good behavior, but that's not. So what he does, or what she does, is equate that to decisions in life, where often times what we do is we equate the result of being promoted, the result of having a car, the result of being appreciated by other people. But what we don't scrutinize is the decisions that we make as the result. And so how often does the audience, and this would be the challenging question, is how often do you go back at a successful result and scrutinize whether or not that was a good decision or not?
Mm-hmm.
Not many, right? And you find this in corporate culture where, let's say you have the top salesperson. Well, you have a top salesperson, but maybe they bend the rules. Maybe they get away with all the other things. And the business owner or the entrepreneur justifies it because like, oh, he's bringing in business. Well, turns out that person is probably the person that you need to fire because that person is allowing a culture which is celebrating the ability to take responsibility for other tasks. So oftentimes our hardest decisions have to do with firing someone based on decisions they make rather than the results that they produce. Now, obviously, the best outcome would be they have good results and they make good decisions, but
Yeah.
to separate the two is extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a long tangent around fixed mindset. Growth mindset would be in the sense that you wouldn't attach necessarily what's going on or how you're being judged. So let me back up. Um, if your mood was dependent on whether or not it was rainy or sunny, whether or not it was, oh, it's going to be a completely bad day. Like right now, it's cloudy and it's about to rain, where you're attaching your emotions to what the weather's going to be, even though you can't control those emotions. A growth mindset would say, okay, it's raining today. I really appreciate that it's raining because it allows the plants to grow. It allows the ecosystem to run. Everything else, I'm going to deliberately make it a great day,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the situations. And so part of that is being comfortable with failure, is seeing failure as a way to get better, as opposed to a way for other people to say, gotcha, I knew you weren't as smart, or gotcha, I knew that you weren't as artistic. And the growth mindset, the humbling part about the growth mindset is that if you set the expectation of, you know what, I'm not really good at this, but I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to get better at each day,
Mm-hmm.
the pressure then gets released. Like there's
Yeah.
no sense of expectation.
Yeah.
Now, one of my good colleagues actually works for a Ivy League school here in Boston. And what she noticed is that every other year, it's a little bit less frequent, but every other year there's a girl, one or two girls that commit suicide in their dorm rooms. And so they'll find them, and the primary reason why they commit suicide is because they've been told they've been smart their whole lives, and then they get to the real world and they're struggling. They're not as good as the other people, even though they're smarter than the majority of the people that are
Yeah.
on this earth.
Yeah.
they've they've seen that as a sense of entitlement of like, ooh, wow, I've never been in this situation. I don't know how to handle it. So then they just take their lives. And that still exists today
Yeah.
where,
Probably the smartest person in the classroom their whole, educational career. And
yeah,
then they're, low 90 on a test, and they're like, that's it. Their whole identity is wrapped up to that one indicator. I think you mentioned this compliant identity.
yeah.
Yeah, it's really, there's some education that needs to go on there, almost like anticipating folks at that level of
Hmm.
schooling.
Yeah, and a part of the fixed mindset too is the weight of or the duration of tests. So they're letting these individuals are typically letting one test define who they are for the rest of their life. So if I got a low score on my SATs, I'm stupid. If I
Mhm.
got a high score, I'm smart. Versus taking each individual instance in their life and saying, you know what, I'm not there yet, not
Mhm.
there yet, but I will be. And so
Yeah,
I think I heard over the last week is the most impactful conversation that you can have is with yourself and with your thoughts. And
yep,
so if you're telling yourself these things that I'm not good at this or I'm not good at that or people are going to judge me, then you know what, it might be true and it'll pay off. Like it'll manifest itself out. So yeah.
yeah. So I think at a high level with the military training as well, they found that the trainers that were in the most intense environments, the ones that actually stayed and then would fail at at the final hour, it would all come down to this fixed mindset where they would say, I've been so good my whole life and now I can't do it. And they make it about themselves versus really looking at it as this is the hardest thing I've ever been faced with. And it's not about me, really. It's not saying that I'm not good enough. It's saying that I need to work harder at this time, even if it's killing me and I have no sleep. And, they do these crazy, like, whatever, I don't know if they're burpees, but they have to, like, remember something. They have to remember like a series of numbers, and then they have to dive underwater and hold their breath for 800 meters, and then they have to get out and climb something and do all of these things, and then at the end mentally remember those numbers, like really insane. And guys were just falling at that point, and the study was tracking what was actually going on right at that moment when they give up. And it was all, they were making it about themselves being not good enough to perform. And that makes so much sense. But that is this fixed mindset in action where you're like, you're tested. And that's why it's so nice. Like you speak about raising kids, like really thinking about the language that we use, because that language gets internalized, and it is that impactful, the most impactful voice is the one we use on ourselves, but that's given to the children by how we look at and how we approach problem solving on these small little moments. And then you're tested when the stakes are higher, of course, but it's like getting in the practice of saying, it's not about me, it's not my intelligence or my ability to perform.
Hmm.
It's a new opportunity that's kicking my ass.
You know what? That's part of why I stay engaged with you, Megan, is like you're willing to just keep pushing and keep trying and just, you know what? I'm gonna get punched in the face, but I'm just gonna keep on going, and I'll be better than yesterday. So um, you don't meet too, and to be honest, it's like there are very few. I would say the ratio would be maybe 2 to 10 or 2 to 20 of the people that you meet where they have a full growth mindset. Obviously it gets bigger as your circles get tighter, but once you find someone with that growth mindset and you end up in that circle of 5 or 6 people that you hang around with the most, there tends to be a little bit of accountability. There tends to be a sense that, wow, I really enjoy where they're going and how their life has been and how they've done it. And if you really peel back the layers, you understand that the smartest, most successful people, the happiest people are the ones that are really open to learning as much as they can.
Yeah.
And where people get mixed up with that is they view people who are somewhat semi-successful and they could be still successful, but they had mentioned John McEnroe. So John McEnroe was number one in the world in tennis, but there was so much more potential that he could have portrayed if he didn't blame everybody else for his setbacks. So it's not so much that fixed mindset can't be successful. It's more so how much growth are you leaving on the table by
Mm.
having a fixed mindset? And I think to add to this, part of the difficulty of transitioning from a fixed to a growth mindset is our interactions with other human beings and our interactions with social media and our platforms. Now, social media is a double-edged sword. It is just as beneficial as it is harmful. This is not, the person really is the person at the end of the day. But I'll tell you a little bit of a story about just a couple of software engineers. So imagine you walk into an office building and you took a job and now you're making a good amount of money. And your job for the next 5 years is to design a website or an app to be addictive. And in order for the application to be addictive, in order for the website to keep eyeballs on that website, you have to design an algorithm which reinforces the decisions that you've already made. So if we log in on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever it is, are we going to stay on the site if we're constantly finding different viewpoints that are against the decisions that we've made for a majority of our life? We're not. We're going to say, I'm going to flip the channel. I'm going to flip the social media channel, whatever it is. So part of the challenge in developing a growth mindset is putting yourself in a situation where you can embrace feedback. And in order to embrace valid feedback, it's tough. Now, one question that I ask when I'm trying to have a conversation or a debate with someone else is, and this is a question from, I believe it's Ray Dalio's book Principles, where the question that you ask is, what information would it take in order for you to change your mind? If there was new evidence that was presented, what information would it be? So for example, if it's, left versus right or whatever it is, if they could prove that this incident did not happen as a fact, would you be willing to change your mind?
Mhm.
And if the person across the table says, no amount of information is going to change my mind, then that person is now deemed uncredible.
Yeah. Like if
So
the writing's on the wall.
yeah. So next time you have a conversation with someone who has a differing viewpoint, just ask themselves, what type of information, if it were fact, if it were true, would have to be fact or true, would it take for you to change your mind? If they can't come up with that, then they haven't internally thought about oh, what if I'm wrong or what if I'm not wrong? And then those are the people that you can filter that out as, okay, take their advice with a grain of salt.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
It's great. Now, I love that you've brought it back to sort of seeking input and seeking more information, whether it's sort of behavioral or if it's more like data driven, like making a decision. I know Ray Dalio talks about when he had that, I don't know if it was a liver, he had some issue going on with his health, and one doctor gave him like a quasi, I don't know, he's like, you have a 30% chance of getting cancer. I suggest you get this operation and get the organ taken out. And he was like, well, this is a really great opportunity to go get some other doctor's input. And he found a path that was different. And I think one of the doctors was like, no, actually, you're going to be fine. And then the third doctor was like, so there's a really low chance of getting cancer if you do these three things. And he ended up not having to go in. And he was literally like planning his death at that moment with what the first doctor had told him. which is really great when you think of like data mining and making a decision about the trajectory of your business, or on a more relational, like interpersonal way. If you think about like the question you asked of your wife after the podcast last week on mansplaining, like just
Hmm.
saying, hey, has there ever been a moment where I said something that hurt your feelings or overrode you in the space of a conversation? I
Hmm.
mean, as a takeaway for those on this podcast, really sort of being investigative around how we, just sort of whether it is, I think you should always be looking at your interpersonal relationships in this growth way. Like, what could I do better? What did I learn today? And when someone gives you the gift of input, to really take it, and not everybody does. I gave someone input last week and they were not appreciative at all, and I was
Mm.
like, wow, we're in the same world. And I think my learning in that was that I am surrounding myself with these hyper growth folks, and I think that this sort of rapid learning and super brain kind of mentality is like really sexy and really where it's at. So where
Hmm.
intelligence and social intelligence is going to become more and more important as technical advances keep happening, we're going to rise to the top, because it's like you're going to be able to actually talk to anyone about
Hmm.
important things and be able to make a connection fast. And I think to be able to continue to be on that path, you should be like seeking input from these different like data points in your life. That any data point that matters to you, look to grow there.
Hmm.
And human interaction should be at the top of your success plan.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. It's crazy how fast technology is changing, and then our brains are not programmed to move at this pace. And
Yeah.
so even something as small as even something as small as pressing a button or swiping up. Um, I've seen kids get frustrated at turning a page on a book. It's like, our digital ecosystem has trained us that things need to happen at a faster rate, when versus now, like being able to physically feel the pages of a book, turn it, and then understand what's going on. And so, not to make it a tangent on technology, because we're on technology right now, but it's just different. We have to be able to pace the slow and then pace the fast. And part of the growth mindset, that is fascinating, is the ability to just be okay with failure. Like, just, we're always taught, okay, there's you can't fail. Like, I'll give you an example. There's another advisor that I was collaborating with, when he was growing up. He grew up on a farm, and
So did you tell your whole story right there?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
So
Oh, sorry.
I can give you just the synopsis so you know the context. So, there's a colleague of mine where at 8 years old in Kansas, he grew up on a farm, and his 8-year-old friend actually killed himself because he made a mistake on one of the tractors. So now he's associated mistakes get you killed. Like, that's his internal mapping,
Right.
where mistakes get you killed. And he had to unwind that. It took him 10, 20, 30 years to unwind that. Make mistakes get you killed, versus in the growth mindset, mistakes get you to where you want to go. So oftentimes it's one of these life events that create this duration, this PTSD,
Mhm.
uh, which puts you into this fixed mindset. So it's not a flip the switch. I'm just going to go from fixed to growth. It's these internal stories that and life experiences that happen to ourselves that builds or calluses that or crystallizes that.
Yeah, and I think really being able to explore what those are and say, what was that moment where the sort of the origin story with that negative mindset, so you can explore it and then sort of back it out rationally.
Yeah.
And then typically is like there's got to be some practice, some ongoing work, because these are so deeply embedded in our belief system that that has a direct effect on our behavior. So to be able to say, like, I'm going to, every single time I have this storyline, I'm going to get up and take a deep breath and tell myself a different story. It has to be some physical act, because this stuff is literally like kind of clogging the energy body. It's literally in the muscular system as well. So it's stored on a cellular level, this information, when it comes up. So it's going to be provoked once you're triggered, and boom, you act out of this old belief system. So it's hard to kind of slow down that process unless you're doing a practice, because it's like you're like, why did I do that again, damn it. So it's like digging backwards and sort of backing into it. I'd be interested, like, so if you could speak a little bit more about mistake making,
Hmm.
and like, because I could still see someone, a pragmatist, saying like, oh yeah, sure, making is great, you
Yeah,
go
yeah.
for it, you first, right? Like, why is that, and how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are areas where you can't make mistakes. If you're flying a plane, you can't make mistakes. If you're a surgeon, you can't make mistakes. But leading up to it, there's certain percentages, there's certain things that you can do. You can set up your own little sandbox where you can make mistakes. So one of the things that I like to do personally, so here, I'll go right into steps to a growth mindset. So if I were in a fixed mindset, the first step that I would take is write down instances where your peers or yourself label you in a fixed setting. Paul's dumb. Paul's smart. Or, you know what, I'm always bad at this. If you can recognize that your circle of friends is reinforcing that fixed mindset, then you know what, maybe it's time to get new friends or interact with different people who have a different perspective. And so it could be perhaps just setting up the environment where you can make mistakes, where other people are making mistakes. So reframe the negative connotation into, I haven't yet put forth the effort into this area, therefore I'm not good at this thing. I'm not good at math because I didn't put in the time to study math or to get good at math.
Mhm.
And it's important to recognize that some of, even from a media perspective, and this will go with this podcast as well, take a look at your favorite TV shows. Let's call Seinfeld, Friends, whatever it is. I want anybody on the call to go back to the pilot episode. Like, go back and watch the pilot episode.
Yeah, yeah.
Most of the time it sucks. Like, the pilot episode is not a representation of what the ultimate show is going to be. And so if you can equate that with a life experiences and find that and say, you know what, Seinfeld was really terrible, the episode one, but you know what, in the middle, like the double dipping and doing everything opposite, that was a really good one. Well, they wouldn't have got to that place if they didn't start from a raw perspective, an unfinished perspective. And to be able to do that, sometimes you have to change your audience. I mean, I know comedians as well. What they do is when they are ironing out jokes, they're not putting out material in Madison Square Garden. They're going to the comedy store and they're ironing out the jokes, and they're like, okay, did somebody laugh at that? Ooh, someone got
Right.
offended. Like, they're
Add more
ironing it out.
space here.
Yeah.
Be punchier here. Like they're
Yeah, be
really
puncher, raise your
bending.
voice at this point.
Yeah.
Add more space here so that they can actually get it. Or, put a little body motion in there. So they're working all the kinks out until they get to Madison Square Garden. Then they have it perfected. But they don't see that. Like, I think Dave Chappelle, even Sebastian Maniscalco, they still do that to this day. They're working out the kinks, and
They're
they're
working
okay.
on new things. Yeah. And you had mentioned earlier the 10,000 hour mark. I'd love to hear, and I know somebody had mentioned that
Yeah.
the Beatles actually were at their 10,000 mark before they popped, which it might have been you actually. It was so like, I just
Yeah,
think that's a really
yeah.
cool analogy. Like, and then you talked about flow. It's like, is that then when you hit your flow? Is that what you would say?
Yeah, so just as a short introduction to flow is the state at which you feel as though the action that you're taking is difficult but not boring. If you get to an action where it becomes too easy, you're not in a state of flow. If it gets too difficult, then you're utilizing too much information or too much willpower to get there. And a lot of this they find in people that are high performance extreme athletes. So there's a movie out called Free Solo,
Right.
where a gentleman, Adam, I forget his last name, but he climbs up the Yosemite National Park's El Capitan with no ropes. And so um, he's in a state of flow where in the movie, he was going through a relationship and his girlfriend goes up to him and says, Adam, do you ever, or Alex, I'm sorry, Alex, when you're up on the mountain, do you ever think that I'm up there with you on the mountain? And he responds, no, not
Mm.
ever, not ever, not once. He's like, but if I did, I think I would get distracted and I might fall. I might not have that full concentration to be able to be completely immersed with what I'm doing. And on the outside, you would think, man, that person is crazy. That person um, is climbing without any ropes. And he's heard the same thing over and over again. He's heard, what if you fall? Well, I guess I die, right? I guess I die if I fall. But what was interesting in the movie was they interviewed his mom, and his mom said something very fascinating. I don't know any mom that could say this, but his mom said, I can't imagine being the person that prevents my son from doing what he loves, even if it results in his death. And I was just like, wow, that is absolutely crazy. And so when I'm watching the film, I'm thinking, you're learning, you're understanding his cadence and his mindfulness and attentiveness. And what you realize is that he's been thinking about this climb for 10 years and he's been dreaming about it. And he has a notebook, step 1, step 2, step 3, where he's rehearsing left finger, left foot, pinch up this way, turn that way, pivot that way. And he's doing it over and over and over again. And in a couple of interviews, he's asked, when do you get to a point where you're at like a level 9 freaking out? And he's like, and I think it was on Joe Rogan, he's like, you'll be surprised. I don't get to a level 9. I get to a 5. Like I never go above a 5 when it comes to concern. So I don't climb anything where things are risky. I just keep on doing it until 300 feet gets comfortable for me, 1,000 feet gets comfortable for me, 2,000 feet gets comfortable for me.
Yeah.
And I was, as I was watching that, I was thinking immediately, you would think, okay, all these kids are going to try to free solo. They're going to try to climb up, and then there's going to be kids that are going to get hurt. And his answer was, well, the minute that they get up 10 or 15 feet, they're going to be scared. They're not going to be like, okay, let's try this out and let's go 20 feet. And the minute
Yeah.
that they fall 20 feet, they're going to be like, okay,
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to do this.
I fell once
Yeah.
from
So,
about like a story high. It was
oh
insane.
my gosh.
Yeah, it was free climbing in Boulder, but my buddy
Oh,
caught me. Yeah, it was
it's
just so
crazy.
intense. It was amazing.
So yeah, it's so fascinating because therein lies a movie where it basically describes one of the best days in the person's life, and if it didn't work out, then the person wouldn't be here. And it was because of the 10,000 hours. It was because he was in a flow state, but he didn't do that overnight. He's been doing that since he was 12, 13 years old, obsessing about it every single day. And so,
Yeah, I mean, I saw that. It was me and my boyfriend saw that. It was
yeah,
so cool. It was like that notebook that you mentioned. So for him, he took this unbelievable climb. I forget the name of the mountain. It is
yeah,
Yosemite is the mountain.
yeah,
Is
yeah,
that the mountain?
yeah.
So everybody's like, it's an impossible feat. What once would seem totally impossible, rather than him seeing it even as that, he, just like you said, took off these little tiny chapters and he would master each one until there was no risk involved. Like he was so methodical about it. It was not at all the type of character you think that climbs this impossible feat. That's like you're saying, that has low risk aversion. It's like, woo, let's do this, yeah. He was
Yeah.
like, they tried to play up the drama as he ascended, and that in my body there was none. I was like, please, this is just like a theatrical
Yeah.
technique. I'm like, basically this dude has this like this, he can sleepwalk it up. He's made every decision 3 times. He's like, should I do it this way, this way, this way? He does it 100 times if he needs to, until he's 100% confident. And I like to think about, so I'm coaching a couple of sales teams right now, and the way I think of this is like, one of the pieces within the 10,000 hour is to track your effort. So you literally say like, what effort, not result, right? Like back to
Yeah.
that drunk driving thing. It's like,
Yeah.
rather than look to the result per se, let's dial it back and look to that effort and really work the effort. What
Hmm.
was the outcome of that effort? Did it work? Did I like it? Could I improve upon it? So if it's just picking up and making those phone calls, can you add anything? Can you enhance that in any way? And really working the effort rather than those outcomes. I think to me, that's growth mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because let's say you in that same situation, this person is the top salesperson and they're doing phone calls and they're like, okay, John's really good at sales. John's just going to close every single deal, like Leonardo DiCaprio style, right? He's going to close every single deal, right? So
Beast mode.
John's thinking in the back of his head, if he's got a fixed mindset, he's like, oh no, I've already done this. I've made it. I have nothing else to prove. Versus John could get on the phone and say, hey, you know what? I messed up. The reason why I'm successful is because I messed up, and I probably could have done it a lot better. But it's so hard when you're in a leadership position to put yourself in that framework where you don't necessarily ask for that praise. It's a title that people put on you. Um, it it's very, very hard to go back to basics and say, you know what? I know you guys idolize me. I know that you think I'm the best closer, but the reason why I'm the best closer, the reason why, back to the Michael Jordan episode of the reason why I succeed is because I failed. And so in that environment, and I see it all the time, where you'll have the top producers, they'll make phone calls, then they get to a certain point and they're like, no, you do it. I've already done it. I did it for the last 30 years, so I don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Or they'll make phone calls and they'll lock themselves in another room so somebody else can't hear them.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So great
Yeah.
point you're bringing up as far as like being able to analyze, the dynamic of and the process that they're going through, because it's important. I mean,
Yeah.
how much better could the sales team get at phone call at someone else's mistake publicly, rather than, you know what, I'm going to talk to you on a one-to-one basis. It'll take forever.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
to
I
me,
know teams that do that. They're like
yeah,
committed to having everyone in the same room, so no decisions, so that it shortens the feedback loop on communication. So everyone heard the decision made. I don't know if it's the most productive, but what I found just in this week of really analyzing like these quick calls, like I've been able to do um, one close happened in under 2 minutes, and I was like, that's crazy. Like it was just the right time. But what I'm reading, The Code of the Extraordinary Mind, Joe Ames suggested it. I had been suggested it numerous times. I was like, nah, I know all that jazz. And I'm
yeah,
loving it. It's so dope. But the guy,
right.
the main dude, I think it's Vijekin, or I forget his name exact. People probably know him. Fantastic human being. But he was like, yeah, he folded intuition into his sales, and his sales just skyrocketed. So
Mhm.
he'd kind of wait. And this is like, who do you need to be to produce those results? It's like, you need to be in tune with yourself. If you're cranky, don't pump out your calls that morning. Go have coffee and chill for a sec.
Uh-huh.
Go have food if you need food, and come back, and you'll be so much more effective. And I
Mhm.
think that bringing in your intuition is a really nifty way to approach sales. And then the other thing that I think was really fascinating, not to make this about sales because that could be a
Yeah.
whole nother piece,
Yeah.
but that imperfection was actually showing higher results, which I think speaks to emotional intelligence. So the pitches that came in, like so articulate and unflawed, like a perfect presenter that has no flaws and never says and is da 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 da,
Yeah.
is actually not as good as just actually stumbling a little bit,
Mhm.
saying when you needed to. Like that's actually so much more effective. People are like, oh, there's another human being on the other side. This
Yeah.
isn't a
Yeah.
salesperson. This is a human that I might even drink beers with at the cookout.
Yeah.
So kind of reframing how we look at performance. Anyways, but that is maybe on a tangent. So I just love this stuff. It's really cool.
Yeah, there's a story, I believe it's in David Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell, where I think one of the individuals is dyslexic. I think it was either JP Morgan or Richard Branson. And he's saying, you know what? It took me. I had to read books 3 times. I had to do everything 300% more, 400% more. But as a result of it, I got a really good memory. So oftentimes the longest path, it's funny. I just had this conversation with one of my colleagues, and we were talking about efficiency, because basically what she does is she says, okay, how can I make things more efficient? And this is going to tie back to life and tie back to everything, where if the question is how can I make things more efficient, there's always a quick answer. There's always, okay, just do this.
Mhm.
But the question would be, and I'll frame it in the frame of raising a kid. So if I were to take my son, and every time he cries, I got to give him a bottle, or my wife has to feed him every single time. That is short-term efficient, because the minute that he feeds, he's just going to go to sleep, relax, great. Short-term efficient. Long-term, what's happening is he's not
You're
able to
building a
soothe
crier.
himself. Yeah,
You're
he's not.
you're reinforcing like demands in crying
Yeah,
and
so
tantrum,
he's not able to soothe himself long-term. So if
self-soothing.
you were to umbrella efficiency, yes, it's efficient, because the minute that the minute that he cries, we're just gonna, okay, great, it's good. But vice versa, let's kill short-term efficiency. Let's say, you know what, I'm gonna let my son cry for an hour. I'm gonna let him cry for an hour and a half. Eventually, what will happen is he'll understand that he can soothe himself.
Mhm.
So short term, he's inefficient. Long term, he becomes efficient.
It's cool.
So what some of these some of what we're doing when we think about change management is we often put the lens of efficiency on the short term rather than the long term.
Yeah.
And so we need to think about, okay, are we picking up the baby instantly, or are we allowing ourselves the space to feel that pain in order to be efficient long term?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I love that. That's so cool. I feel like
yeah.
these last two sort of things, these words we're sort of hovering over should be different segments. And I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
love to also open up to the audience if you guys have any burning things that you want us to kind of go into. Like, tell us what topics you want. We're listening, all ears open. And thank you so much, Paul, for hopping on. I'd love to kind of wrap up here for the folks. Do you want to give just a couple like takeaways that if someone's new to this, like maybe a book to check out? I think Carol
definitely.
probably, and like a couple things they can take away with them today.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of what we're building here in the podcast is to be able to have an actionable item. And so what we'll do, and Megan and I will produce this, is we're going to create a list of things that people tell themselves, a story that people tell themselves when it comes to fixed mindset, and then a list of things that they can tell themselves in order to transition over to a growth mindset. So for example, I suck at math. No, I haven't made math important in my life. So in order to make small changes, you have to identify the story that you're telling yourself. So if you go to our website within the next week or two, we're going to provide a PDF for you to download so that you can understand, are you a fixed, are you a growth, and position yourself towards the growth mindset. So
Love it. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
So thanks everyone. Thank you, Paul. We're so grateful to have you, and thanks for all of the listeners. We really appreciate you guys tuning in. So if you think anyone would enjoy this, definitely share that out with your network. And you can go to our website now to get more information about becoming a member. And we have a private Facebook group. You just go on and look for Boston Men's Group. And thank you all so much. We appreciate you all.
Great. This was fun.